Well, hello everyone. I am a computer scientist and I am a professor, which makes me a teacher and a techie. And I mean that in a positive sense, okay? So I actually enjoy technology a lot. And I also enjoy a lot teaching. So as a technology, you can imagine, is a very exciting time for me because there are a lot of ideas coming up. The evolution of internet, it's something really exciting. But this excitement somehow gets compensated by the difficulty I find to translate all that technology to my classes, to my teaching. I devote also my research to make sure that the technology that appears now, I can apply to improve a learning environment. And I've seen that is very, very challenging. Everywhere there is this message: education must change. The message is everywhere, not only TED Talks, everywhere, right? And I think we have to move beyond that. We have to start answering the question is, how do we change education? Because we pretty much agree that education needs to change, but we need the tools to change them. So what I'm going to talk about today is first about a technology that we are all aware of, which is analytics. It's being applied today, and I think pretty much everybody is familiar with it. But then I'm going to focus on how to apply that technology to a learning environment. And there is some potential here because that technology is tackling one of the problems we have to improve our learning environment, which is, let's look at the factors that play a role in those environments and let's try to improve them. Let's try to first measure them and improve them. So I think there is a lot of potential there. And finally, I'm going to tell you about the type of ideas we are exploring in our research lab. So I think the first question we should ask ourselves is like, why? Why should I let you see? Why should I let you observe me while I'm learning? And let me start with a quote by Lord Kelvin that had a good point. He said, well, if you measure something, there is a possibility that you are able to improve that something. And I think this is relevant for learning, as we're going to see shortly. Let me give you an example. It's a little bit extreme, but I think it helps to bring the point. This is Stephen Wolfram. He is the creator of Mathematica, and he is also the CEO of Wolfram Research. This person has been tracking every single event in his personal computer since 1989, 12 years ago. So that means that he has a huge amount of data about the way he works in his computer. The figure you're seeing at the bottom is one dot for the time of the day in which he sent one of his more than 300,000 emails since 1989. So we can see some tendencies there. In this other figure, you can see is his working habits. When is he receiving emails? When is he sending emails? When is he scheduling meetings? And at the bottom, he recently installed a pedometer in his shoe, and now he is able to measure the number of steps he takes every day. Again, this is a little bit of an extreme case, but the point here is that technology is now allowing us to measure things that we could not measure before. So the next question is obvious. We get a lot of data. We will be able to collect an immense amount of information. But what do we do with that? Well, first, we have a lot of tools. They are emerging. If you go to this website that I just showed you, Quantify Itself, it's a website devoted precisely to this type of tools that help you measure things that were never possible before. And interestingly enough, they have a catalog, and this catalog keeps growing every day. Now has more than 500 tools. So it's actually very interesting, the type of tools that now are becoming available. So good, we have a lot of data. The question is, what do we do with them? Is that really important? And interestingly enough, Hollywood brought the spotlight into an interesting story. It's a Major League Baseball team that has a very modest budget, but they have a person that analyzes all these large amount of data that is producing games, players, different plays, everything you can think of. And this person analyzed the data with a purpose, which was make adjustments on the team. And these adjustments translated that the team performed well above the expectations that it had at the beginning of the season. So this is something that shows that analyzing that type of data is useful. And again, I know that all of you are familiar with this type of technology. It's data mining technology. It's being used these days, and we are aware of that. Department stores analyze our purchasing habits. In this case, the story I'm showing to you is a department store that knew that a woman was pregnant because they were analyzing the purchasing habits. The interesting part is that the woman was a teenage girl, and the department store knew that before her father. But again, this is something we know that is happening, and it has this type of application, and it's real, it's here today. Let me give you another example, which is a little bit more intuitive, perhaps. Marketing is changing. Sending a message out there is no longer sending a message to everybody. They know the audience, they know the target, and they tailor the message to that audience. And therefore, knowing the audience is very important for these people. And again, this is something we already know. And of course, we are also equally aware that with these technologies, we have some issues. Okay? We are being watched. Now, technology is observing us. And I like a lot this comment that was posted in Seth Godin's blog a few days back. He says, well, let's talk about privacy. And let me tell you something. Privacy, we've got much less than what we think. Why? Because we purchase with credit card, we use a mobile phone, we do certain things that we know that are being analyzed. Therefore, privacy, it could be an issue, but not so much. But he makes a very good point. In fact, what users want is not to be surprised. You don't want to be browsing in a certain website and then finding out that that website knows a lot about you. So I would put it, we don't want unwanted surprises, so to speak. Or another way to put it, and this would apply to learning environments, you want certain type of surprises at a certain moment, but not always. Now, let me focus on another interesting field, which shows us the power of data, which is medicine. When you are ill and you go to the doctor is going to look at a certain amount of data that was collected from you. These are your medical records. And this is very interesting because the human body is a very complex machine, and we need a lot of data to understand what is happening. And the doctors manipulate that data, and they manipulate the data for a good purpose, which is to cure you. And even if there are surprises there, which could be pleasant or unpleasant, there is a clear target, which is let's improve your health. So let me stick for a second on the medicine field, and let me present you this loop here. Now this loop has 5 steps. First, let's collect data, and think of a doctor. The doctor is collecting data. That data is reported back to that doctor. Okay? With that, the doctor is able to make some predictions, and those predictions usually translate into a treatment, which is something that improves your health. And this loop is repeated and, more importantly, refined. Now, the faster we make this loop, the better the chances, especially in some illnesses, that we get cured. So this feedback loop is very important, as well as the speed in which we create this loop. Now, interestingly enough, Goldman and some other people define this loop as the 5 steps of analytics. And they apply also to learning. If you think carefully, the first step of collecting evidence, we can do it. We can report it to the tutors, to the students, to the stakeholders in general. They can make some predictions as well and act on the learning environment. And that is very powerful. And then we need to provide this loop. So let me now focus on how do we apply this technology that already exists in a specific field, which is learning analytics. And again, any educator, when you are teaching something to some students, I think that question is always in the back of your mind. Are they really learning? Or I'd rather put it, how are they really learning? Because let's be honest, any educator is constantly thinking, maybe I could improve this. Maybe I could do better. Okay? And this question is always there. And I would even go that far as to say, educators probably are convinced that maybe they should change something. At least if we pay attention to all these messages we hear on education must change. Okay, I'll change something then. But then the question is another one. Who guarantees me that whatever I change translates actually into an improvement in my learning environment? And this is a tricky question. Or even worse, an educator could be convinced that something must be changed, but doesn't know what exactly has to be changed or how. And therefore we have a problem here. And personally, I think this is the reason why education is not evolving at the speed that everybody is expecting. Because it's a very tricky context in which we don't have as much information as we would like. John Huddy is the director of the Melbourne Educational Research Institute. And he wrote a book in 2009, very interesting book, in which he reviewed 800 meta-analyses on academic achievement. He categorized all the factors he could identify that influence the quality of a learning environment. He divided them into those that effectively positively, neutral, or negatively the learning environment. And he summarized his conclusions in very revealing sentences. One of them says, we need better tools to measure these factors. And this is quite important. After reviewing all those studies, we need better tools to measure. And the second one is we need to detect when excellence is occurring, which seems to suggest that we might have excellence in some of our learning environments, but don't know exactly when and how. And this is a big problem. So in other words, learning, to me, it's a very complex task affected by lots of factors, and I need quick information about those factors relate to me. And I need to be able to act on those factors very quickly. And here is where I think learning analytics can make a difference. Because technology will allow us to collect a large amount of data about all these factors, and will allow us to relay that information to tutors, students, institutions, any stakeholder in general. Interestingly enough, recently we see some excitement also in the corporate world. A lot of initiatives have been appearing, companies that they realize this potential and they are trying to make a difference in learning experiences. And interestingly enough as well, not only new companies that are emerging, but also fairly well-established companies in the educational markets. And they all follow the same idea. Or like Steve Shetler, the CIO of Junior, put it, let's use big data to really understand the student. Or I would have said, to really understand how students learn. So this is exciting because companies are beginning to realize the potential of this area, but not only companies. Together with these initiatives in companies, we also have numerous initiatives in the research front. Let me bring your attention to this particular one. The Society for Learning Analytic Research, of which I'm a member of the steering committee, by the way. This society appeared to gather together all these people all over the world doing research on learning analytics. And they go even beyond that, and they're already proposing certain platforms, or in this case, a model to perform open analytics, which is very interesting as well. So as we can see, we have all the right ingredients. Now let me tell you a little bit about the type of initiatives that we're investigating in our research group. And we work under this premise that no matter what kind of experiment or no matter what kind of idea you come up with, you have to bring it down to real life. So we work under the premise that we need to try things out. We need to measure the impact of our solutions, okay? Now, as I told you before, this is a very exciting time for learning analytics. There are a lot of avenues that are appearing, and all of them seem very promising. In our research initiatives, we have focused on two. The first one is we want to widen the scope of our observations. We think that we are able to observe students beyond them clicking on a website. That could be one observation. We can get a lot of information through like platforms that are out there, like Khan Academy. Yes, we can get students clicking on a website, but we can go beyond that, and I'll explain that in a second. And the other premise, which we think is very important, is we want to maintain the tutor in the loop. The tutor is a very important factor in all this, like the doctor. You get all this data, you relay all this information, you grow this feedback loop very fast, but maintain the tutor in there, because tutors typically have a very good intuition on how a learning environment works, and we should capitalize on that. So let me tell you about this first idea of providing students with a wider way of observing. And this is the compromise we worked out, we put in our courses like 2 years ago, and it's working fairly nicely. The idea is the following. We are assuming that students are using their personal computers, and we provide them a completely identified self-contained environment to work in the course activities within their own personal computer. It's a computer inside their own computer. What will we achieve with this? Well, we achieve a compromise. We tell them, look, we'll give you this fully configured. Please, when you work in the course, use this application. And that way, we're able to observe you. By the way, related to privacy, we inform the students details about the type of events we are recording. And by the way, we are also informing them on how to disable this mechanism if they want to, because it's their right. Okay? So what is the consequence of this? Well, we end up with a lot of data. And this data is as if I am looking at you while you are working on the learning activities, but only while you're doing that. The rest, I don't care. So this is like these partial view seats that you're given. You go to a stadium and you're able to see the game, but certain parts, you don't see anything about it. But the rest, you have a very detailed information. And this is very powerful. So what do we do with all this collected data? Well, the first thing, which is very important, is combine different factors. Not only we get information from this environment, which is very rich in observations, but we also have to combine that with other sources. Which ones? Well, the usual. Like, for example, your institutional learning management system provides certain logs that should be also merged with this data. And going back to my previous point, the observations of the tutors, they should be included on those data sets as well, because they are very important. So what we end up with is a very comprehensive set of events that include annotations from different sources. What do we do with this? Well, let me give you some examples. No matter how much time you devote to create the best course material, a digital native today will take 5 seconds to stop looking at your material and look for something else in the net. And this is something we observed. We observed by tracking their searching habits. So what we can do now is turn that to our advantage and say, okay, let me observe that pattern. Let me observe what are you searching. And what we can do is select those documents that are relevant to the course automatically and relay that to either the students automatically, that would be an option, and say, look, these are these additional resources that the rest of the class found, and we think they are relevant. We can do that automatically. Or another option that is also worth considering is relaying that information to the tutors and say, look, these are the 10 most interesting documents that the students are searching. What do you think about them? And we let the tutor decide and say, okay, yeah, they become part of the bibliography of the course, or I comment them in class, or let the tutor decide. So this is an interesting initiative. Another area we are exploring, and it's working also fairly nicely, is the fact that we now can observe also students when they are outside of the class. In other words, we can somehow measure the level of engagement. And let me give you an example. If you plan certain activity with your students and you want to make the most out of that activity, sometimes you give them certain previous activities to carry on in their own personal study time. And sometimes this is very important. Now, if we are able to observe the level of engagement with those activities, then we can do something very intuitive, which is, what if I inform the tutor about this level of engagement before the session takes place? Let me give you an example that will clarify it. Suppose you prepare this discussion session in class, and you give some previous activity where students have to research certain concepts. Would it be useful for you to know the level of engagement? Yes, because the discussion would take very different shape. Let's go to the two extremes. Suppose that all the class is heavily involved with that material. Then the discussion probably, you can take it even further. You can pose new issues. You can take certain other things that you left because you thought they were too advanced, but you see that all of them are engaged. So you push the discussion level a little bit higher than expected. Or the other way around. What happens if you know in advance that most of your class is not taking part in these activities? Then you would take the discussion and maybe bring it to some basic issues. Now, my hypothesis is that pretty much every educator does that in real time. When you go to a class, you present certain activity and it's not working, everybody reacts. We are supposed to be resourceful people, and we do something else. Now, the idea here is that with learning analytics technology, we know that in advance. Now, I'm not saying that a tutor has to redesign completely a session, but maybe we can inform about this 2 hours before the class. And we do something that is called just-in-time teaching, which also has its advantages. So we can do that as well. Another area we're exploring is working in teams. And this is something that is appearing all over the place. Our students are supposed to know these and working in teams. Okay, let's work in teams. But then working in teams has a lot of issues. And we can benefit a lot from detailed observation. We can analyze how do they exchange documents. We can analyze how do they write minutes for a meeting. How do they interact with each other. And then, again, we can relay that information and maybe detect things like conflicts, which is something we have seen in our courses. We tell the students, you are supposed to work in teams because this is a skill that is needed for your future. And then what we see is that they start working in teams and conflicts appear. And tutors need to deal with these conflicts. So again, with detailed observation, we can maybe anticipate the appearance of certain conflicts, and the tutor definitely would benefit from that information. So this is another idea. And of course, we can rely on simple reflection, which is, if I am measuring a lot of things, let me relay that back to you. And this is the idea that I'm presenting here, is just take the data you just collected and show it to them. And by them, I mean stakeholders in general. Okay? The premise here is that it needs to be very simple. And this is a tendency techies have, right? To put lots of wheels, bells and whistles there to configure lots of things. Forget it. It has to be simple. And show that back to the users. And of course, use the channels that they are already used to check. Like, for example, the institutional learning management system. In the upper right corner, you're seeing now that information placed there for them to see. Oh, these are the measurements. Okay. Of course, you might have a tutor that wants a detailed account of what is happening. And we do have that prepared as well. And we offer the tutor a detailed summary of the events. And this could be also a detailed summary for those students that are interested about knowing what is happening in terms of learning objectives or learning parameters in their classes. And it could be also something interesting for the institution. Now let me talk to you about something a bit more advanced that we have in a much earlier stage, which is detecting emotions. So we have a lot of data. Can we anticipate emotions with that data? Well, certain things can be definitely done. The trick here is the following. I can detect transitions between steps, and I can model that. Let me give you an example that probably will help it clarify. Suppose you tell students to follow a certain procedure to obtain a result, and you are able to detect the transitions between trying to get the result and getting the result. Now suppose that your observations tell you that the ratio of transitions of making these steps and getting the result is very high. In other words, you have students trying and trying and trying. So you can more or less say, well, students are not getting the solution, and there is a high chance that they are getting frustrated. So there, it's not that we exactly know the emotions they might be feeling, but we might have an approximation. So it's not that you pick up the phone immediately and call the student and say, oh, why are you frustrated? But you can tell the tutor, look, you have these students that appear to be repeating the exercise an unusually high number of times, and they might be getting frustrated. So the tutor might approach the student and say, how is it going? And you could do that because you have all this data. So these are pretty much the ideas that we're playing with in our research group. And as you can see, they all follow the same premise. If you let me see how you learn, then I might improve your learning environment. Thank you very much. I'll be more than glad to answer any questions you might have.
I should ask in English, I guess. So thank you for your very interesting speech today. It was new to me. My question is about your students. Do they like what you do with them? Do you share your findings with them? And what do they think?
Okay, very good question. Is how much of that do I share with the students? Well, let's say first thing, certain things first. Whenever we give them this environment, there is a message you cannot miss explaining what we're doing, why we are doing it, and what they are getting in exchange. And together with that, as I mentioned, we also tell them that at any point in time they can disable the system. They can even go back and ask us to remove every data we keep about them, and this is just complying with the law. We're not doing anything special. And the experience we have with roughly 2 editions of 300 students is that pretty much between 80 and 85 of the students allow the system to work in their learning environments. Okay? What we do not have is a clear picture of what happens with the rest. We didn't ask the reasons why you would not use the system. We just have these raw numbers that says the vast majority of the students are okay with that. And I think part of it is what I mentioned before. It's a compromise, and it's a decent compromise. I'll give you something that is fully configured for you to work in the course. I know you're not going to be working in my course all the time, and I respect that. In exchange, I'll be tracking your movements there, and if you want to do anything else, just go out of the environment, and I have no way to track that. And that compromise seems to be working with the data we have so far. Any other questions? Yes?
Again, thank you for your speech. I just wanted to know, how do they act differently, your students, knowing that they're being more or less checked on and analyzed?
Okay, that's a good question. Does the measurement process affect the magnitude we're measuring, basically? And we try to avoid that, and there are certain things you can do. Like, for example, the reaction is not immediate. It's not that based on what they're doing right now, you're going to go and talk to them immediately, because then they will realize that, okay, I better not do that, because then the professor will contact me. It's more like deciding from the part of the tutor that you are there and let them know that if they have difficulties. In other words, we have respectful approach in terms of contacting with them and see what is happening. And the reaction is fairly good. it is true that after showing to them some data, they come back and ask you, so why are you looking at that data? It's not so much that they feel uncomfortable, but they want to know why, okay? And the best thing that we have found is that being honest works. It's like, well, to be honest, we don't know why, but this data offers me certain clues. Let me give you an example. We track the frequency that each member of a team contributes to the documents shared among the teammates. And then we said, look, we're going to track how often do you share documents. So what happened is that some of the teams, you had 1 or 2 people doing most of the sharing and 1 or 2 members not doing anything at all. Those 2 are the ones that come and talk to you. It's like, why are you looking at that? It's like, well, I'm looking at it because it gives me certain information. Maybe the question is to ask you, why do you ask, right? And then they begin to give you certain explanations. Well, the reason why I have a 0 there is because, I give my documents to somebody else, and that somebody else is the one that shares them with the rest, and therefore I don't appear there. It's like, okay, that's fine. I mean, but at least there's one thing that I think is positive, is that it gets them thinking. It's like, why in this measure am I at 0? Maybe it's a good reason, and if it is, we are okay with that. Now, from the point of view of the tutor, you can detect patterns. And if you see somebody that is systematically doing something suspicious or something very good, then you get an idea of what is happening in the team, and they are okay with that. Yes?
Thanks for your... Thank you very much for your presentation. My question would be concerning your solar initiative. Yeah? So, and what I have understood is that it's trying to build an open analytics framework, and so my question would be, how do you envision then putting data sets together and provide tools to for example, for teachers beyond the level of your own institution?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If it is really an emerging community, that this emerging community needs these data sets, are we going to be able to share these data sets? It depends, because that data set will be obtained in a certain location, geographical location, with certain laws, and you have to comply with those laws. But I guess we can work some things out. Like, for example, creating data sets will give us a lot of insight on how students interact. And maybe if we cannot share the entire data set, we can share some summaries or some conclusions, or even we might be able to learn how to recreate data sets artificially based on our observations. So it's not exactly the URL that this student is looking at this time, but it's a model that follows more or less the same population distributions. And this is something that might be a good compromise to get the community going and sharing results. That could be a solution.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you.